Good afternoon, everyone. We're super excited for you to be joining us today for our 18th Growth Hour webinar from Shed Advisor about hot topics in HR. My name is Rebecca Bradley Ray, and I will be your moderator for today. If you have any sort of comments or questions throughout this webinar, please feel free to enter them in the chat box at any time. We will have a Q&A section at the end of the webinar, so for those of you on the phone, you can just unmute and ask us directly at that time. But we will probably be taking some questions throughout the webinar as well. So yeah, feel free to drop them in at any time. Now, let me introduce our host for today. Steve Byler is a certified speaker and coach with Maxwell Leadership and a certified EOS implementer who assists leaders and leadership teams in getting clear with their vision in order to get more of what they really want from their business. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Rebecca, and delighted to be here with all of you again today, and delighted to have Sheri Bender with us. Sheri is a sought-after speaker, HR consultant, and seasoned leadership trainer, known for her down-to-earth, engaging approach to workplace transformation as an ICF Professional Certified Coach and adjunct professor at James Madison University. She brings both academic insight and real-world expertise to leadership development. Sheri, we are delighted to have you here with us today and look forward to this conversation about HR.
All right.
People
Yes.
really are kind of the most important asset that a business has. And, John Maxwell says everything rises and falls on leadership. And one of the kind of spin-offs I take into companies is right people that fit your culture, sitting in right seats where they want to have the capacity to do their job. That remains undefeated in the marketplace. So people really is the most important thing. So look forward to what you have for both me and our audience here today. So welcome again, Sheri. Take it away.
Thank you. I am happy to be here and hopefully impart a little knowledge in the HR area for the attendees and those watching a little bit later. I have worked in HR for a long, long time and have seen a lot of changes, and it continues to evolve as we know, and as I'm sure that you all are keeping up with. And we're going to cover a lot of ground today. We're going to start off talking about compliance, delve a little bit into those pesky I-9s that have been on the radar recently, and then wrap up with talking about how all of this fits in with culture and what we can do to help create positive cultures at work, because they are very related. And if we're not getting them right, then it can make a big impact as well in a not so good way. So I am Sheri, and I'm happy to be here. We've got some session objectives, which I'm sure that you saw if you signed up for this webinar or checked it out online as you were watching it. And we're going to jump right in by talking about one of my favorite topics, the HR audit. And it is not as scary, to me at least, as a financial audit or an accounting audit. But some people like to call it an assessment. You might think of it as a self-assessment or a proactive assessment, but it's basically where one of my taglines is always be auditing, because there's just so much in the human resources or, the practice of people, if you want to think of it like that, when you're in an organization. But it's a systematic way of reviewing and evaluating one part of your HR operation. So you might want to look at your practices or your policies or your systems to make sure you are compliant with the laws or the regulations that apply to your business based on your location, your number of employees that you have, what industry you're in. I mean, a lot of these cross paths and create more to-do list for you. And so that's the purpose of doing the audit, to make sure that things are as they should be and you're good. So that when somebody from an outside agency with the initials after their names or with the departments show up, you know what your risks are before they discover them for you. And that is what ultimately decreases your risk for fines, penalty, and potential jail time in some cases, depending on what the law is. So always be auditing is my tagline that I always tell people. You should always have something in the area that you should be checking on in human resources. And so there's various types of audits or processes that you could be looking at so that it doesn't feel like, a tornado over you. You can break it down. What's the saying? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's a really good way to think about looking at your overall HR practices. Regardless if you're a growing business or if you are a very evolved business that has been around a long time, because HR itself and the expectations of that area of your business is continually evolving. I get emails almost daily about either something that federally, one of the agencies that has alphabet soup in it is, and what I mean by that, everything has an initial, like Equal Employment Opportunity is EEOC. ICE, which deals with that I-9 form. And if you don't know what that is, we will talk about that. ICE, they have, a different name for that, Department of Homeland Security, DHS, and then all the laws we deal with have initials as well. So types of audits, you might just start out with saying, we want to be best in class. So what does that look like? And are we doing it? Strategic, we want to plan 5 years down the road for growth potentially, or to sell our business, or for, someone else to take over the business and run it. Function specific, that stretches a little bit past HR. Maybe you want to look at HR and safety, or payroll, or operations. You can fill in the blank and go on and on there. Policy and procedures. And typically when I talk about that, if you're large enough, if you have a handbook for your employees, what I have found over the years is sometimes organizations have a handbook, which is the guidelines that employees look at to say, these are the expectations, right? Then some companies have even a policy manual that leaders or owners look at and say step by step how we should be doing things. And then there's this third thing that's not a document, but it's actually how we do things. So a handbook, a policy guide, and then the way things are really done around here. And then in my world where I live, we also have the federal and state laws that tell us what we must do. And in an ideal world, all of those things merge and they're all the same. So that would be the ideal world. We could look at workplace culture. You can do an audit of that. Our vision and values and our mission says this, and this is what we hang up on the wall and have on our website, and it's beautiful and it's what we intend to be. But if we talk to each employee, if we did a focus group, how does that show up? If we interviewed our customers, are they getting that same vibe? Do they feel that our culture is that way? Diversity inclusion, how diverse are we? We could look at that. Risk assessment. What's our risk? Safety. Some of the things I'm going to talk about today, if you haven't heard of them, there could be some risk on your end because maybe you don't have practices in place. And then certifications. I don't know for your industry if there's any specific type of certifications that could apply, but for some industries, like ISO certification, 5S, those types of things, quality, food safety. Some organizations strive for that. And then every year they have to recertify, or every 2 or 3 years. So the list goes on. And that's just the beginning. So if I were looking to do an HR audit, or if I were sitting in your shoes as a business owner or a leader and say, but we only have 7 employees. Why do we need to audit HR? It doesn't have to be a huge mammoth project. It starts small. So you just look at, what do I want the purpose or the scope to be? Then you collect and you review your documentation. You identify any compliance issues that you may have noted. For example, if you leave here and you're like, what, I just want to make sure our payroll practices are good. And I'm going to throw a number out to you. Generally, federally, in most states, we have to keep payroll records for 3 years. That's the rule, because if you get audited, they're going to want to look, or if somebody gets angry with you and they say they weren't paid correctly after they leave, or even while they're working there, they're generally going to come in, that outside agency that's going to do this research, and they want to look back for 3 years. And so good rule of thumb, unless there's other guidelines or certifications that you have that require you to do longer, like government contracting, we have to have 3 years of payroll records available. And so maybe you're going to audit that to see if you have 3 years accessible. So that would be your scope and your purpose. And then you're going to go collect the documentation and you're going to review it to see if you've got them or not. And then identify any compliance issues that you see. Well, we've got them for some employees, but we don't have them for some other employees, or we can't find them all. We don't know where they're stored. You don't have to panic at that point, but you document your findings and you prioritize what gaps that you have. And then you come up with a plan for what you're going to do about that. So when I break it down like that, hopefully it doesn't sound so overwhelming. But what I know we can't do is take that elephant of HR and all the things that fit into that and do it all at once. That's just not a good plan for success, because there really is a lot that goes into human resources. And I'll show you a chart. Yes, go ahead.
So just a quick observation here.
Mm-hmm.
Smaller businesses often just kind of go into the HR things with goodwill, and they
Yes.
hire people they trust.
Mm-hmm.
And this stuff goes kind of unevaluated until
Mm-hmm.
they hire somebody who ends up being the wrong person and they have an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything is in chaos, right? Because they don't
Yes.
have anything alignment. And I think one of the ways that I would summarize maybe what I hear you talking about is the government actually has expectations for how businesses manage people, right? The
That's
feds and the
absolutely
state,
true.
okay, and they
Mm-hmm.
communicate those through laws. Well, then the business has to be sure their expectations are lined up with the government, because that's where the compliance comes in. But then we hire
Yes.
employees and they bring their own sets of expectations, which may or may not be aligned with ours as a company or with the feds or the state. And the goal is we've got to get all these lined up, because uncommunicated expectations are premeditated resentments. Premeditated
Mm.
resentments are actually risks for just getting out of sync. So the people stuff just really matters. And I like the call to do an audit, which is just step back and do a little work, or have somebody
Mm-hmm.
do some work with you to be
Mm-hmm.
sure that we have the expectations aligned with federal, state government. We're actually communicating those as a business. So employees are on the same page with the leadership of the company as to what's
Mm-hmm.
expected. So we don't have surprises. Those surprises can be quite expensive.
Absolutely, yes. And we're only going to touch the tip of the iceberg today. But just using the example, and that was very eloquently said from someone that doesn't specifically focus in HR, Steve. I'm impressed.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, but you work in the leadership area, so you get
Yeah.
it. Um,
And to
but
be just a little side note here,
mhm,
back when I actually ran a company day to day, we were at about 45 employees.
mm.
Actually had a team from JMU's School of Business come and do an HR audit for our business,
So yeah, so
and
they they
it
did
was
a
a
good job.
5-person project, and it was
Yeah,
a great experience. Really
yeah,
was a great experience.
they did a good job.
Yeah.
Mm. And my allergies are acting up, so I apologize everyone for taking drinks here, but it's either that or coughing, so I'd rather have the water.
No.
Um, so the handbook is one example that I'll use to share or kind of expand on what you're getting to, Steve. What I often share with clients is, we really don't need a handbook. There's no law that says we have to have an employee handbook. But what the handbook does is it sets those expectations. It
Yeah.
tells the employee what the company's, I don't like the word rules, but it tells the employee what the benchmarks are.
Yeah.
For example, attendance. And I've worked in healthcare, electronics, and manufacturing, and I don't love like the point systems for attendance.
Right.
And I think we've evolved because the world is changing. As we talk about culture, we'll get into that a little bit more. But what I see a lot now is, you're expected, we've got jobs to do, we're expected to serve our customers and clients, and attendance is a really important part of that job,
It
and
is. Yeah.
being here on time. If you're not going to be able to make it to your scheduled shift, you need to be in communication with your immediate supervisor as soon as you know this.
Right.
Here's the acceptable ways that at our company, we expect you to communicate with your supervisor, and they lay that out in the handbook. And then that's generally covered, on day one of orientation, so that the new
Right.
employee knows what that, because it's different at every company. Some
It
companies
is. It
allow
is.
texts, some companies don't. Some have a call-in number, some, say you need to call 2 hours before your shift. So you need to tell the new employee what that expectation is. And
Yeah.
then, if you do a point system, like, if you miss a whole shift, is it this? If you missed a half shift, it's this. Because if not, then it's a free-for-all. And
Yeah.
then there would be a surprise when my supervisor sits down and says, well, you called off yesterday, and so now I need to give you this whatever write-up.
Yeah.
And then I would be angry. And so then I would kind of feel, resentful because
That's
I
right.
didn't know that up front.
Yeah.
So we don't need policies or handbooks until we need them, until there's a problem.
Yeah. And
Um,
many policy manuals aren't written until there's been problems, and it's much better to be preemptive
That's right. So tell me
rather
what's
than have somebody's blood beside every single policy that we have.
Yeah. So just tell everybody what the policies are and the expectations, and then work with that.
Right.
Be transparent and set those guidelines and be fair and consistent with that. Because employees do know whether you're consistent or not, believe it or not. Employees
Oh,
do
they
know,
do.
and
They
they
do.
do talk, and work through that. It's a lot easier than it is to try to manage by situations.
That's right.
So yes.
And it gets far more critical once you get a second layer of management in a business,
Mm-hmm.
because very small businesses, there's a trend toward more consistency because one person answers all the questions. As
Yes.
soon as you get another layer of managers in place, that complexity brings chaos and a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of kind of failure and consistency for how we treat people,
Mm-hmm.
unless you really have these handbooks and clear expectations in place.
That's
So
right. And
I've
leadership
derailed you
alignment.
now. I'll let you get back, but
That's
this
right.
is good. This is good stuff.
Yeah, and it's helpful, but those leaders, that's where leadership trust comes in, and leadership alignment. And I call that eyeball to eyeball conversations, because if you and I were the team of two middle managers, and you are a stickler for the policies and holding your team accountable for that, and I am a little bit more marshmallowy
Yeah,
and forgiving, then that's when you would hear me as the HR consultant say, well, your company may as well burn the handbook and not have it, because that's creating more liability for the organization to not have that
that's correct.
consistency.
Yeah,
So it's very vital that you have the policy so that everybody can follow those guidelines and talk through it to make sure that there is that consistency.
yeah. And when we don't have consistency, we at least have a consistent standard that we can appeal to and say, this was a breakdown of our actual policy. This is not how we do things around here.
That's right. Or we need to change the policy because this one
Correct.
isn't working for
Yeah,
all of us.
yeah.
Good. Customers. So that should say custom HR audit questions. See, I was already thinking about the customers when I typed that in. So again, depending on what your focus would be, you would, think about what questions you would be looking at. So if you were focused at your handbook, let's say your handbook was written in 2010 and has been collecting dust ever since. Well, you would want to say, what federal laws have changed since 2010? What state, if I only operate in one state, what state laws have changed since 2010? So it would, your questions, it's kind of like working on a project. You would have to say, what do I need to look at and kind of uncover to determine if this handbook is still up to date or what needs to be changed. What feedback do I hear from my employees or managers that are causing them heartburn with the current policies the way that they are in the handbook? And then if you were looking at policies and procedures, you would do the same. Which ones, do we not have clarity around? Which ones create problems? Which ones do we get the most, complaints about? And so depending on what you are actually looking at, and these would be some common areas that you could audit. And there's tons more. I just picked kind of the big buckets that you could look into for your processes. Your onboarding, when you have a new employee after you've made the offer and they're getting ready to start, today's a Monday. So typically people like to do their orientation on Mondays. What do you have somebody do when they show up? Do you just stick them, at a desk and say, fill out these papers and then let me know when you're done and we'll get at it? Or do you actually spend some time integrating them into the workforce and letting them know about your history and meeting the team members and, getting to really get integrated into your organization so that they really get excited about making the choice to come work for your company versus all the other choices that they could have chosen to come work for. What are your competitors doing with their onboarding that might be working just a little bit better than what you're doing? Ask people, find out, ask your family members, ask your neighbors, ask everybody. So whatever you're auditing, talk to people about it to find out what's the best practices. What are other people doing that you're not doing? What's working well, what's not working, what's broken. And that's how you can, get good ideas. So that's kind of how I recommend, think about putting on a different pair of reader glasses and different pair of lenses when you're auditing each one of these practices. And this can be used throughout your business. I'm just talking about the HR area, but you can do the same with safety, with operations, with finance, with any of it. The list can go on and on. I'm a very process improvement oriented individual. And I have to stay focused or this could be a 5-hour call.
Yeah. And I would say in EOS, which is the operating system that I help companies implement, we try to keep it as simple as possible. But then every process we have really does need to be revisited every year. And really, audit is just a great word to use for that. That process needs to be audited. This is what it says. What are we actually doing? Is our practice better than our document? Let's get it updated, get alignment, and retrain to be sure everybody's doing it the right and best way. Because that's how we deliver our customer promises, is by an organization internally that's aligned.
That's right. I'm focused on my big rocks, Steve. The audit and the positive workplace culture are the two big rocks.
There we go. You're talking the language.
I know traction. So this is the federal, kind of think of this as the matrix, if you will, for employee count and the laws down the left side here. And think of this as your guide to say, okay, so I have 11 or more employees. So what laws do I need to be aware of? So OSHA, if you have 11 or more employees, if you have any employees, you need to be aware of OSHA. But if you have 11 or more employees, then you need to be aware of the OSHA recording and the posting that is up from February 1st to April 30th. I had a client recently I was doing an audit for, and they were like, oh no, we don't have to follow OSHA. They had just gotten to 15 employees. And I was like, tell me more about that. And they were like, well, we're small. We don't have to do OSHA. And I was like, and this was manufacturing, and they had like power industrial trucks and all the things. And I was like, okay, this is new to me, but I'm still interested to hear more. And they were like, well, when you're small, you don't have to do the OSHA report and you don't have to do safety training and all of that. So we had to do some looking up and some training and a lot of follow-up on that. So
Yeah.
now they're
Yeah.
posting their log and they're doing the training and all of that. It was just they had grown. They started with 5 employees and now they're at 15, heading to 20 employees. And nobody knew, kind of like Steve, like you
Yeah.
said, we grow
Yeah.
and we just
Yeah.
have somebody doing it. So what you don't know can hurt you in these cases, because with OSHA, one finding can have a price tag of $160,000.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And this one in the shed industry and maybe the manufacturing sides, of course, it's one of the big critical ones
Mm-hmm.
because you have equipment and
Yeah.
there's risk involved in this kind of equipment. The
Mm-hmm.
preemptive work pays. It's costly, right? You have to do the work. You got to hold the
Mm-hmm.
safety meetings. You got to do the compliance stuff, but it's much cheaper than that first fine.
That's right. Yeah. And so the first column there says, does it apply to all employers? And so you can see down to the OSHA record keeping. We've got all checked just to be safe. And then the next cliff, if you will, starts at 15 and it goes down to Title 7. And that's what I was talking about with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, when we had our pre-call. So I also have a chart like this for each of the states. This one is focused on federal laws. And so that 15 plus employee column, going down to Title 7. So that's what you think of if you've heard EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity, with like discrimination. So, with hiring or firing or how we pay people. I'll use Virginia as the example here to talk about how state law and federal law play together, either nicely or not so nicely. And it's like this with all the states. So 15 is when discrimination comes in at the federal level. Back in 19 and 20 here in Virginia, there were changes to our Virginia law. And anybody can Google this. It's called the Virginia Human Rights Act, VHRA. Everything has initials. I don't know why. And now the threshold in Virginia is 5 or 6 employees. It's 5 for discrimination and 6 for pregnancy accommodations. I don't know why the number's different, so I just say 5.
They might make things complicated.
I know it happened in Richmond. I don't know. So we say 5 to be safe. And now things are being added on it almost annually. So now in Virginia, as employers, if you have 5 or more employees, you need to be considering all of your policies and hiring and pay and how we do business, because you can be sued right in the state of Virginia for all of those things that are typically only EEOC things. So smaller employees now have to make sure, or employers have to make sure their policies are as they should be. Train managers, anybody that's involved in employment decisions, because the lawyers are saying here in Virginia, people are being sued right in Virginia. They're not even bothering going federal because it's faster. So all of the states have these little nuances with different laws. And I'm just using that one as an example, so that wherever you do business, you're aware of not only the federal, but also the state laws and how they either play nicely or they don't play nicely together sometimes. Any thoughts or questions on that, or Steve, anything that would be helpful for your audience?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
It's just, other than to just reiterate what you're saying here, is that, when you're in a growing company, there is creep to the laws that begin to impact you at so many different levels. You hire a couple new people and you don't think about all the implications of this for policies that you now are legally obligated to comply with. That's why the audit just matters. To come back, just ask the question. So what has changed? Are we in alignment now, given the changes that have taken place in our business? And, most of us don't get into business to do this kind of work.
No.
It's like, oh, we got to do this yet? Oh, it just
right?
costs money. It takes me away from making money, and frustrations. So I
That's
think,
right.
well, toward the end here, I want to have just a little bit of practical conversation about what some tools are and ways to kind of just
Yep.
address these pain points quickly. So
Absolutely. So again, I've talked about some questions that you could come up with, if you wanted to do this yourself. Those were some examples just briefly, and I'll share these slides as well as a handout afterwards. The I-9, that's the document where anybody that starts work, if you've ever had a job, you probably had to fill it out yourself if it was after 1986, which is when this form came in. It's where you show your IDs when you start a job, and then the employer hopefully verifies that. It is not to say whether or not somebody is legal or not. It is to show whether or not they are eligible to work in the U.S. And this has been hot on the radar of employment discussions in the last 2 years. The auditing impact of it from the ICE agency has been very heavy in the last 2 years, and they have increased their audits tenfold since January 2025. And the penalties, I'll skip down to that line there, they can be $288 per form up to $2,800 per individual document. So if you hired me and you didn't complete my form correctly, you could assess a fine. You could be assessed a fine $288 up to $2,800. And up to the extreme end of it, $28,000 per individual that you hire if they believe you knew the person was not authorized to work, and you hired them anyway. And I'll give you an extreme example of this. I won't spend too much time on it, but I did an audit for a company and was looking at their roster of employees, and I'll use my name example, Sheri Bender. I was in the system as Sheri Bender, but I only worked there for like 2 days and I was terminated. And then they also kept their independent contractors in their payroll system, which is totally fine for you to do. Some payroll systems allow you to do that. But I was in there as Sheri Bender LLC. And I was like, tell me, Sheri Bender's in here twice, but what LLC, what's this about? And I wish I never did hear this, but they said, well, Sheri couldn't produce her documents for the I-9, so we weren't sure if she was legal or not, but she went out and started her own company, and so we hired her as an independent contractor. So that might be a situation where if they got actually audited by that outside agency, that could raise some flags like it did for me as the proactive auditor. And that could, if they dug deeper, could potentially end up in that higher category. So anyway, just be aware of filling out those forms. Make sure that you understand, how you're filling them out and filling out all the sections of it, because on this slide, I gave an update from March of 2026. It used to be that if you didn't fill out the hiring date or you didn't get a signature on the form, you could go back pretty easily and just say, oh, it was an error, my bad. I'll have somebody, I'll have them come right in and fill it out right now. ICE, I guess, was seeing a lot of that in their audits. So now they've expanded that substantive era and they're focused more on giving fines for those kind of things that were more administrative errors. And they're saying, we're going to start assessing fines on those things. So whoever's sitting with somebody to fill out those I-9s really needs to pay attention to making sure that they are filled out correctly. So that's really the big takeaway from that is just, making sure that onboarding paperwork is filled out as it should be. And as it should be is that section 1 should be completed by the new hire on or before day 1 of employment. So if I were doing onboarding today, my new hire would need to fill it out today, or they could have filled it out last week if I had them come in, to do their paperwork before they started. I don't particularly like that because I like to pay people for all of their time that they're putting in for the company, but some people email it to them and they fill it out before. And then I, as the employer, need to complete that certification where I'm looking at the documents they presented within 3 business days of employment. So no later than Wednesday, close of business, I need to complete it for the people that started today. I usually try to do it on today if I'm actually bringing people in today.
Right.
So those are really the big things. And most time the violations are just administrative, not really somebody doing it on purpose.
Yeah.
So those are the basics for the I-9s. And then just looking at overall audits, things that happen a lot are people being classified as exempt, which is where we're paying them a salary when really the job duties they're doing should be hourly. No job description, so you don't really know what people are doing. We're not really keeping files on people. So, they say they were hired as a manager of all the things, and we say that they're a general laborer. Well, if we don't have a file or we didn't have an offer letter, it's a he said situation, and we really
Yeah.
have trouble, proving it. Again, policies and handbooks, look at what your state requires. Inconsistent pay practices, even just an offer letter, or when you do a pay change for somebody, having them sign something to say that they're aware of it. The I-9 errors, making sure you have your state postings and your federal postings is important. Even if I would think most of you have a common site where people work, but a break room or something like that where people can see those postings. Somebody asked me, they said, why do they have to see them? And I said, well, think about like the EEO for discrimination. You don't want to have an employee have to come ask the supervisor, well, who do I contact if I feel like I'm being discriminated against? The posters have all of that information on it so that the employee knows what their rights are. And really, those are the big things that we've already talked about. So it's important to make sure all of your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed, because you want to run a good business for your employees that are serving your customers and interacting with them. And if they know that things are as they should be, then they can feel confident that they joined the right company, and that they're in it to win it, and you're doing the best for the company and for the employees. It could help you identify what items you might need to provide additional training on. You may be able to get your employees to help you develop some of the training or enhance the process for different things. And then just start working to continually improve those processes. Again, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
One bite at a time. Yeah.
It's not something that you have to go out and be like, we're not doing any of this stuff. It didn't get this way overnight. So generally, it's not going to get fixed overnight. You identify the biggest risk or biggest priorities and then work your way backwards from there.
Yeah, and I would just note one of the just great practices I've seen leaders use is one of the managers has a new hire. They've now been working for a week.
Mm-hmm.
And when they meet the new employee, if they're not part of the onboarding process, which I recommend they be part of the onboarding process,
Mm-hmm.
they just circle back around and say, hey, you've just been onboarded here. Tell me, how could we improve the process? How could we have made it easier for you to really feel like you're coming on strong, well positioned, well prepared to start your job? And then just shut up and listen, because the new employees are the ones who just had the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great way to just access their resources and perspectives.
For sure. That is definitely a million-dollar question, I would say. And one that I really like also is, whether it be then or maybe another 30 days later, is, what was something that you learned on your own that you wish you would have known sooner?
Yeah.
Because that kind of gets what's missing in the orientation or the onboarding process.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So, and again, reassuring them that they're not going to get in trouble or there's no right or wrong, but you're just looking to enhance, for other people, that onboarding process.
Right.
And all of these things can enhance, the overall communication and the employee experience. That's what, we focus a lot on customer or client experience, but we also, employees are internal customers. So we want to focus on their experience as well.
So critical.
And then better accountability. We talked about, if you have a handbook and you have those policies, that, we're all holding each other to that standard. We all are being transparent about what the expectations are, and that we are holding ourselves to that benchmark and that standard. It helps us be consistent across our leadership practices. And if they're not working, then that's an indicator that we need to change to what would work. But again, being open to that feedback. And then ultimately, the goal would be less, they don't even have to be HR, but employee relations issues. That's what the goal would be, is that employees understand what that benchmark is, they work to that benchmark, and if somebody's just not going to fit the environment or what those expectations are, it should be evident very quickly that you've got a circle and a square, or a square and a circle. And the other employees can see that as well. And so why does all this matter? I said we talk about this as we move along, but the world changed 6 years ago, whether we like to believe that or not. But the power dynamic has shifted from more the organizations to the individuals. And we're seeing that because I don't know how the recruiting is where everybody is on the call, but recruiting is more difficult than it ever has been. You're seeing individuals who aren't staying at organizations as long as what they were. And it's becoming the norm to be okay. You're not seeing lifers, 20 years of service. 2 to 3 years is kind of good now. Breaks in job service is okay. It's not frowned upon as much as it was. Now, I work with a lot of leaders too, and I know that sometimes changing that mindset can be very challenging, but we also don't know what people are dealing with outside of the workplace. And so I think working on that empathy, we're an empathy culture now, can work to our benefit, because we can find some really good workers if we can open our mindset to that as well. Maybe they've had to move across country. Maybe they've lost some loved ones. Maybe they had to shift and be the caregiver for different reasons. And that's what I mean. It's the power has shifted from organizations to more of the individual for various reasons, and more from profit to mutual prosperity. If you haven't had the pleasure of hiring across all the generations that are right now in the workforce, all the different generations value very different things. So I would encourage you or challenge you to pay attention to that as you're interviewing or as you're working with your teams, because that can really bring value to your organizations. And then it has shifted from a we to a me. What's in it for me? And again, the me is going to be dependent on what generation you're looking at. It used to be that the younger generation didn't really care about the 401ks and the retirement plans. Now, a generation earlier than that is starting to care about that again. And so being aware of what's important to each recruiting group in your community can really make a difference to who wants to join your organizations. Anything to add to that, Steve?
Yeah, these are great observations. And, working with companies really not only across the country, a few in Asia as well. These dynamics are globally true.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think, the history books being written on how COVID has impacted culture globally.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe that particular season deeply impacted these items that you're noting here.
Mm-hmm. And I see it, everywhere with all different sizes of organizations.
Yeah.
And the ones that I see winning the most are the ones that are more, again, I'll use the term changing your lenses, the ones that are more open to challenge their personal leadership core of passing on the applications that you see that might have a gap, or just challenging yourself and what you've always held tight to being open to what somebody might have to offer, and just seeing what you might get on the other side of that.
Yeah, and I've seen some phenomenal hires
Hmm.
that were made that just a traditional review of a resume would have thrown the resume out.
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
and then I have people also who have those resumes and tell stories about still being kicked out. I just say, well, that's probably not an organization you want to work in because it
That's
sounds
right.
like that they're stuck back. Really, they're stuck back in the '80s as to how they're approaching many of these HR tasks. And
That's
so
right.
it's culture's dynamic, and we do have to just we've got to be at the top of our game. We can't slack here because people is the core. If you don't have the right people in the right seats, you don't have enough people, you don't have good people, it's
That's
just not
right.
going to happen. So
You're
this
exactly
this is
right.
the space. This is the space. You can be really good at numbers. You can be really good at production, but if you don't have the people, so you've
It's
got
not
to
going to
get
get
good at the
done.
people side. You got to get good at the people side.
Hmm. It's just not going to get done. And
Right.
this slide, I did mean to update some of the bullets that I had here, but that song changes. The generations, I did mention that we've got more generations. People are working longer now than they ever have. Technology is changing. Change is changing faster than it ever has
Right.
in our lifetime. So even change is hard, but now change is changing faster than it
Yeah.
has.
Yeah.
And so just keeping up is challenging. And the non-traditional talent. So really being creative about how we're recruiting and where we're recruiting from, and again, what we were just talking about. But then, thinking about, you're hearing a lot about burnout and mental health and frustration, and trying to think differently about, like, even scheduling and how work gets done. And everybody's talking about AI and all of this stuff, and so innovation, and then what else? I don't know how the shed business has changed or what innovation might bring to that. I have been dabbling in the tech space myself. And one of the most interesting things I heard, which is kind of adjacent, I think, to the shed business, but they're using GPS trackers now to deal with like fencing. So instead of building fences for cows and horses, they're doing the GPS thing because it's cheaper, and it just works differently than fencing. So that's something.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
So that's something, again, adjacent. It's not really, but anyway. So I don't know how innovation will impact the shed business, but I'm thinking that it probably will.
Oh
And
yeah.
how you adapt that, can be really positive. So thinking about what innovation can you build into the shed area, that
Right.
would just be awesome.
Yeah, and just a few touch points here. Just in the last, I would say, 3 weeks, I've had phone calls, Zoom meetings with people who are on the cutting edge in our industry, and it's really around the spaces of lead generation, sales models,
Hmm.
and that's where we think is cutting edge technology. That's where AI is starting to impact how we work, kind of on that the sales side, the consumer facing side.
Hmm.
But I also had a phone conversation with somebody who is looking at AI driven manufacturing processes that reshape how a product is built a bit, but AI is able to make the decision and drive robots to do the production. And they're talking about production processes that literally have no human being on the floor. Somebody is monitoring it, and it could be on the other side of the world, you
Yeah,
know,
it's
and
amazing.
and this production is taking place. So,
Hmm.
whether you like change or not, it's coming, just as you mentioned. And we don't all have to be cutting edge, but we do all have to be open to change,
Hmm.
whatever that pace of change is for us.
Yeah. I want to be in it. Like, I want to be in the change, like doing something
Yeah.
with it. So that's, I'm,
And
I'm,
that's honestly, that's where you get some of your best people too. They want to be
mhm,
part of that. They want to
mhm.
participate. They don't want to feel like they're stuck in the Stone Ages somewhere. So
That's right.
it's challenging.
It is. Or, I could just say, no, I'm not very technically savvy, so this is too much for me. I'm going to get out of here. But that doesn't sound
Yeah.
fun to me. So,
Yeah.
anyway, so the good and the bad, everything we've talked about today is not going to go away, at least I don't think in my lifetime. So we have to be proactive and thinking about like, what's the plan when times get tough? And everybody's tough is going to look different. Is it when, if you have 5 employees, is it when one person quits? Is it, when you get too much work and, how do you pivot? How do you, so having a plan for that measurement equals results. I have seen so many businesses that if they're not paying attention to even some of the things in HR, if you're not monitoring how long it takes you to fill your jobs, then how long is too long? We don't know. What's your average? How long does it normally take you to fill a job? We don't know. We just post it and hope for the best. Well, then you don't really have a benchmark to know, if this is a long time this time or if it's a short time. So start measuring things, just so you have some things where you can talk about ROI and numbers, because then you can impact it as you continue to go forward. Employee engagement, some of the things that you might be wanting to work on, your employees are the closest to it. And so talking to them again about their employee experience, about what they would do. If you have new hires, how did they find out about your opening? What do they recommend? If they have friends that are looking for jobs, how do they find out about jobs? So get your employees, involved as best practices, because they can sometimes be your biggest PR to help you out. Not to say it should be your only source, but utilize that.
Yeah. And in the sales side, referrals are the easiest closes. The same is true for hiring.
Yes.
You have a referral, the person has been referred to work at your company. They come as a referral from a great employee. And that's the low-hanging fruit. So you want to be sure that you use that in hiring.
Absolutely. And then I mentioned earlier, thinking about your mission, vision, values, and how that fits with, with somebody that you're looking at hiring or somebody that you have on your team. What I like to ask on this, topic is if you have a mission or a vision or values, or if you have all of them, if I were to be able to talk to one of your employees right now, would they be able to tell me what it is? And would it match with what you said it was? And then the third thing is, would it match, I always say the big shiny gold picture frame that you have in your proverbial lobby. If they don't align, then it's too much. If it could be as simple as, we build the world's best sheds. If that's your mission, then everybody should know it and they should say the same thing. And then that way they're all working towards the same cause and they feel a part of something. So it doesn't have to be that big, that nobody knows what all that says. You should be aligned for a purpose. And then each of your employees, like that last personal map on the end there, they should know how they fit, how they contribute, and how they're helping towards the success of that. And then that's really how you get that culture going, and get people excited about all rowing in the same direction. And as Steve said, get people in the right seats on the bus, and building that positive workplace culture. And I use the example of a square and a circle. That means somebody's not on the right seat in the bus. Doesn't mean that maybe they don't fit on your team, but maybe they're not in the right role, or maybe they haven't been trained right. And so you need to step back and evaluate. But sometimes it does mean that they're just not going to be able to help move you forward on that road. Where it needs to go. And everybody feels that, if you are a team of 15 or a team of 10, or if you're an organization of 40 and, it's a department of 5 and you've got one person that they're not the right. Everybody knows that.
It works.
Um,
It just drives it down.
And so, lastly, just thinking about, what is your culture? Um, if I would challenge you to think about, either a time that you personally have worked at a really great company environment or company culture, what it felt like, and if you were to emulate that or find a way to kind of bring that into your organization, what would you pull in? And then thinking about your culture on the other side, if you could identify one thing that you could improve, what would you pull in to start focusing on today that you could improve? Um, and then again, I'll ask you if I could talk to one of your employees. Do you think they would pull that same improvement in? And that'll help you identify, where to focus that energy and start working. Because again, like the audit, that elephant, you can't do it all at once. You have to have a very focused agenda. And then once you get that moving in the direction you want to, you can pick something else and start working on it.
Right. Right.
And that's how we make those incremental adjustments. And every time you hire somebody or somebody leaves your organization, your culture shifts just a tad.
Yeah.
So if you experience turnover, your culture is always shifting. So that's something to keep in mind as
That's
well.
it. That's it.
Mhm. So that's really that was the big information that I wanted to share, was always be auditing and then thinking about your continuous, culture shifting as people come and go, and how you can continuously give back into that to make sure that the employees are having the best experience possible.
Excellent.
So with
So,
that, I'll
Rebecca,
stop sharing and see what questions or other
yeah.
things that you would like to ask about.
Okay, Rebecca, any questions that you have or somebody wants to ask a question here as we wrap it up?
Well, anybody, if you have a question, let me know. I have one to kind of get us started, or at least here. But of course, you've been talking a lot about, how companies can implement and audit themselves. But I'm curious, with you as a professional, when you go into a company, where where do you start usually? What do you look for?
That's a good question. So it really depends on the focus of the audit. If it's a specific pinpoint audit, then we will focus on that specific topic. If it's just a general, we want to make sure our HR is as it should be, then it's a scope that we work on, and that looks at all the things. So it's a complete HR audit that checks, compliance with federal, with state law compliance. If you're in multiple states, we do look at all the states that you operate in. I will note that if you have even remote salespeople that work in other states, the business must follow the laws where the employee works. And a lot of people don't know that. And so that adds another layer of compliance. And, we check for that and make sure that you're compliant with that. And then you get a nice report that indicates what's compliant, what's not, and then prioritizes what to fix first, or at least what's recommended to fix first. And then, as a consultant, we could partner to fix things, work on project basis, or, some companies say, okay, thank you very much. And we don't know what happens after that. Hopefully they
Yeah.
continue to chip away at it.
Excellent. And so I have a number of clients who have been very successful with fractional HR, both
Mm-hmm.
for consulting, compliance, and then just ongoing. I'm a big fan for companies. Really, a company typically can't start thinking about a dedicated HR professional to
Mm-mm.
their. Well, you have a number? I have a number. I'm just curious if you have one. How many
I mean, I,
employees?
I say until they get to 75 or 100 employees.
Yeah, that's those are my numbers.
Yeah, but it doesn't.
75 or 100, you probably
Yeah.
need to start thinking about it. Up until then, if you're internal, you're going to struggle with the expertise. A
Mm-hmm.
fractional is a great stair kind of step to get you there. And then
Mm-hmm.
also the other question I had, there are a lot of software platforms out there now that can help you manage your ongoing, and help you kind of stay compliant. And I don't know what your thoughts are. Do you have some favorites that you recommend? I mean, but some of the ones I know, Bamboo, Gusto, Paycom, Workday. What are your thoughts about those sorts of things for ongoing compliance?
Well, my favorite is the one I'm building.
Ah,
But
there we go. So now I did not know about that.
yes, but those platforms are typically payroll based, and will help you with payroll and like very modular information. What I tell people, because I do audit their system that they have as well, it is a trust
Right.
but verify system.
Yep.
And so, give you an example. A client had hired a person out in California, and their mandatory disability insurance had never triggered. And the payroll company was really good about sending the person emails saying, "Hey, we think you got somebody in California. We think you got somebody in California," but it didn't specifically say you must do X, Y, and Z. And
Yeah,
so
because they weren't signed up as having somebody in California.
that's the trust but verify. So they were alerting
Yeah.
them that you hired somebody in California, but they didn't say you must do the disability. You must make sure that you pay this if they work over this many hours. You must have sick and safe leave.
Yeah.
And so you can't just trust that the payroll system is going to do all the things.
Correct. Good word.
So
Okay.
yes.
Anything else? Anything else? Questions from anybody on the webinar or Rebecca? If not, we'll go to just a reminder that we're moving our next webinar date, I think, is June the 22nd. You can, again, if you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe so that it boosts our channel and you'll be notified when these come online. And then also you can sign up at shedadvisor.com for notifications and a newsletter. You can listen to us online on YouTube, but also there's a dial-in for people that just want to listen on the fly. Sheri, thank you so much for joining us today. And any last words, HR wisdom as we go?
If you need any assistance, feel free to contact Sheri Bender at pulsehr.com.
And her information will be linked down below this video as well. So you can click and go to her website and do learn to value professionals who help you get in your A game as an entrepreneur rather than living with these kinds of risks that are unknown and not understood. You don't have to be an expert in everything. You just have to know people who can help you get there. And Sheri is one of those. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Sheri, for this really valuable content. Appreciate it tremendously.
Thanks for having me.